Welcome back to Transmission on Vent TV. I'm Sammy Cameron, and today we're talking about medical procedures. Joining me today are Fury, Jez and Nate. Thank you for joining us today. So, have you had the operation? Isn't that an offensive question?
I've had, my appendix removed.
Fabulous.
So, yes, I have had the operation.
Fabulous.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I used to be Tina Arena, so yeah, I've had a few operations.
Well, when someone asks me that question, I usually say to them, well, you show everybody in the room yours and I'll show you mine. And no one's taken me up on the offer yet.
So you put it back on them?
Yeah, put it back on them. Let them feel uncomfortable. And I'd love someone to take me up on the offer, and if they do, I promise I'll show.
Mate, there's probably just a time and a place for that question.
It's not a great question. It's not something you should ever ask anybody, is it?
No. It's just really aggressive, impersonal, like
it's making
entitled.
So many assumptions, like there's the operation. So there's one or two, aren't there? Do you think there's a few different sort of surgical, medical procedures that we can have, do you?
There's ridiculously large amounts.
Yeah.
Like, you could do anything, really. And nothing's particularly right, nothing's the one, nothing makes you more trans, nothing makes anything. It's just, it is what it is, and some people are comfortable having some operations, other people aren't. It's just whatever.
So it's very much an individual choice about what we feel uncomfortable about and what we need to address.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of people that feel like they don't want to have particular surgeries, but there's like this standard narrative or traditional way of transitioning, which I think dominates a bit of the trans space, and I think that can make people feel really uncomfortable or disempowered when they say, hey, actually I have a different relationship to my body, and that's not going to work for me. And I think that it's difficult for people to find a voice or to feel validated if they feel differently.
Something that I really hear a lot is like, I'm not trans enough. So I think that making it like the operation does like invalidate a lot of people's experience and undercut it. So yeah.
So there's stigma associated in our own community by our own people that if you don't follow the standard path that is expected of you, that there's something wrong with you, and people feel that within themselves.
Yeah, I don't know why that is, whether people are seeking to be mirrored a lot within the community to validate their own decisions and their own identity, but there's certainly a diverse range of bodies and identities and desires in our community. Wouldn't everyone agree?
Yeah.
I think that there's not very many narratives from what I've seen about that don't adhere to some sort of binary. Although there are so many more coming up, which is really exciting. But in the psyche, in the general psyche, there is a lot of split still, binary split.
That's true. And so that's part of that is also that the clinicians that we see try to channel us down that route.
Yeah.
And gatekeep and only approve for certain procedures based on an identity that is still in that binary that model. So,
I guess I understand some of the clinician's perspective because some of the procedures that you have are irreversible, and that they want to know that this is something that you're going to be okay with for the rest of your life. But it's still pretty hard, isn't it?
I suppose, I lost my appendix. I'm never getting that back.
You anxious about that?
Well, I mean, so and I could make an informed decision to say, well, yes, I'm going to sign the piece of paper to have that removed.
And nobody else needed to give you any consent at all.
No.
It was just you.
Yes.
Yeah. Whereas for us, we've got to get other people and convince them and use arguments to persuade them to the way that they want to think of us.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, a tattoo is kind of fairly permanent. Having a child is fairly permanent. You don't get that sort of like rigmarole, and that's just because it's a heteronormative narrative, really, or like a standardly acceptable narrative. This is just something that people don't generally understand.
And it seems to be the only area of medical intervention of any sort that this happens for. People can go and get all kinds of cosmetic surgery, and they do.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
they don't need to go through a process of, psychological examination and detailed analysis. So
yeah, I think it does come into the whole idea of making it a mental health issue, like people seeing it as a mental health issue as opposed to a self-perception or a self-choice. Yeah, there's a history of that, so I imagine that comes into it.
I've often wondered whether it's also about the ability to have a baby as well, because I don't think that they want people that are so genderqueer or trans people reproducing outside of the standard binary. So I don't think that society is comfortable yet with trans men having babies, you know. So I think a lot of the way that the surgeries and the approvals happen is around still maintaining that heteronormative sort of narrative of if a baby is born, it has to sort of still come from, you know, a woman that looks like a woman, you know.
See, I'd almost argue that it's slightly different in that there's trying this preservation of that they want you to maintain your fertility. Like, it's kind of this idea that you can't make a decision. So as a 25-year-old guy, you can't make a decision that you never ever want to have children. And so my take on it is it's actually that way, that they're actually going, well, can you make a decision about this? And so, well, yes, I can. So it's kind of, preservation.
I agree. It's definitely that comes into it as well, because I don't think people in their 40s go through the same processes on the same questions. But there is that period of like early 20s to like late 30s where things are a lot more intense for people.
I mean, it's one of the questions they ask on the consent form. You know, you actually have to consent that, you know you're going to become infertile if you do this particular procedure, and you have to agree to it. And you get lectured about it, that do you know these sorts of things? Well, yeah, I've already made an appointment to come and see you, and I already know what it is I want to do. You're just kind of getting in the way, slowing me down. And every day that you make me wait longer, I feel more anxious about my body and more uncomfortable about it. What about the idea of having to go overseas to do surgery? Is that a big challenge for people, do you think?
In terms of access, I suppose, is that there are some places, so particularly in Thailand, there's some really good, there's some surgeons that do a lot of sort of surgeries around sort of gender, but there is sort of that access that you have to be able to go overseas, and people are potentially losing their support networks and things like that to you know, have these procedures, and there's also costs involved and things like that.
I know someone who married to go to Germany so that they could get the surgery they wanted without paying for it. So there is an access in regards to cost and the fact that, you know, to be who we are, it does cost us money. Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us to talk about this. I'm Sammy Cameron on Transmission for Bent TV. Look forward to seeing you all next time.